My husband asked me to move out of our bedroom on a Tuesday evening. I was folding his shirts when Daniel walked into the closet. He stood in the doorway with that particular stillness he always had when he was about to say something he knew I wouldn't like. The kind of stillness that usually preceded an announcement rather than a conversation. "Vivian's coming back to the city," he said. "She needs a place to stay for a while. The guest room is too small. She gets claustrophobic." I kept folding. The shirt in my hands had a loose button I'd been meaning to fix. I remember the night I'd sewn it back on. 2 hours of careful work because Daniel didn't like the way the dry cleaner did repairs. He'd never thanked me. He'd simply worn the shirt the next morning as if it had always been that way. "The guest room has a queen bed," I said. "It's larger than most hotel suites. Vivian needs space." I stopped folding. I looked at him, 43 years old, still handsome, still wearing that expression of absolute moral certainty that had made me fall in love with him 15 years ago. He had the kind of face that made people trust him immediately, the kind of face that made you believe he would always do the right thing. "Where should I sleep?" I asked. Daniel didn't answer immediately. That was unusual. He usually had answers for everything: board meetings, business strategies, family disputes. But this question made him hesitate. "The storage room downstairs could be cleared out," he finally said. I set down the shirt. The storage room. 40 square feet of concrete floor and metal shelves, and a window point one bare bolt, the place where we kept Christmas decorations and old tax returns. The place with the water stain in the corner from the pipe that had burst 3 years ago. My husband wanted to put me there. "I see," I said. "You won't have to stay long. Vivian just needs to get settled. She's going through a difficult transition." I knew about Vivian's difficult transition that I knew because Daniel had been talking about her for months. Vivian's coming back. Vivian needs support. Vivian's been through so much. Vivian. She'd been a ghost in our marriage long before she ever booked her flight. Vivian was the one who got away. The girlfriend from his 20s who'd moved to Europe for a career, married someone else, divorced, and was now returning to America with a broken heart and a suitcase full of expectations. "You want me to live in a storage room so your ex-girlfriend can have my bedroom," I said. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's not how it is." "Then explain it to me. Explain what I'm missing." "Mara, you're being dramatic. It's temporary. A few weeks at most. I'm just trying to be a good friend to someone who's struggling." "While making your wife struggle instead." His eyes flickered with impatience. I knew that look. It was the look he gave when he'd already decided a conversation was over, and I was simply refusing to get with the program. "You're always like this," he said. "Everything has to be a battle with you. I'm asking for a small sacrifice, a few weeks of inconvenience. Is that really too much to ask after everything I've given you?" I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I opened the second drawer of his dresser and reached underneath, a movement so practiced that Daniel didn't even register it. I pulled out the folder I'd been hiding there for 3 months. "Everything you've given me," I repeated. I set the folder on top of his neatly folded shirts. "What's that?" His voice had changed. He didn't like it when I did something unexpected. "Open it." He didn't move. I opened it myself. Inside were documents, bank statements, phone records, a copy of an email Vivian had sent him 6 months ago, before she'd ever announced she was coming back. The email where she told him she still thought about him, where she said she'd never stopped believing they were meant to be together. I'd found it on his tablet. The tablet he'd left open on the nightstand. The tablet he thought I never touched. Daniel's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, recognition, then the familiar flash of anger he always turned on me when I caught him at something. "You went through my things?" I reached into the folder again. This time I pulled out the divorce papers I'd had my lawyer draw up 2 months ago. "Not just through your things," I said. "I went through a lot of things, including the separate bank account you didn't think I knew about. Including the property deed you signed with your mother that transfers ownership of this house to a trust she controls. Including the part of your will that leaves everything to Vivian if something happens to me and we're still married." Daniel went white. I wasn't sure if it was because I knew or because I'd said it out loud. "You're not going to try to fix this," I said. "You're going to sign these papers. And tomorrow morning, we're going to the courthouse. I don't want the house. I don't want your money. I want out." His mouth opened and closed. He looked like a man who just realized the ground under his feet wasn't actually solid. "Where would you even go?" he finally asked. "You have nothing. No career. No family. No savings of your own." I smiled. That made him angrier. "Mara, be reasonable. You're 53 years old. You've been out of the workforce for 15 years. You have no degree, no references, no network. If you walk out that door, you're walking into poverty." I nodded slowly. "Interesting that you think that," I said. I pulled out one more document. This one was older, faded, signed in ink that had yellowed with age. It was my grandmother's will. The grandmother who had owned a small textile business in the 1970s. The grandmother everyone in Daniel's family had dismissed as just a seamstress. The grandmother who taught me to embroider while she told me stories about building her business from nothing while raising 3 children alone. She'd left everything to me. Everything wasn't much by Daniel's standards. A building in the old part of town, some antique equipment, the trademark for a name nobody in high society recognized. Except that building was on land that had increased in value 50 times over since the 1970s. Except the city had just announced a major development project around that block. And except the business my grandmother built had always been more successful than Daniel's family ever knew. They'd assumed it was a hobby, a sentimental side project, the kind of thing a woman did to feel useful while her husband handled real business. They'd never looked at the tax filings. They'd never seen the contracts with the high-end design houses. They'd never noticed that this small embroidery shop had supplied work to 3 different luxury fashion brands for over 40 years. I'd been waiting for the right moment to reveal this. I'd been waiting for the moment when Daniel thought he had all the cards. I'd been waiting for this exact conversation. Daniel stared at the will. His eyes moved across the figures, the property valuations, the listing of assets, the notation that the business had been operating continuously for 45 years and had never taken a single loan. He stopped. This is what I have, I said. Which is more than you ever bothered to find out, because you never asked, because it didn't matter to you. Because the things I did were never important enough for you to understand. His face changed again. For a moment I thought I saw something. Something that might have been regret. The barest flicker of recognition that he'd made a miscalculation. Then the doorbell rang. I knew who it was. I'd known she was coming. I'd seen the text on his phone while he was in the shower. Vivian stood in the doorway of my house wearing white jeans and a cashmere sweater. Her luggage was arranged artfully behind her. Everything about her was artful. The slight frown that suggested concern. The way she held herself like someone who'd been through hardship but remained gracious. The eyes that swept past me and landed on Daniel as if I were a piece of furniture she'd need to step around. Mara, she said, I'm so sorry to intrude like this. Daniel didn't tell me you'd be home. It was a lie and she knew it, but she said it with such practiced sincerity that even I almost believed her. Daniel stepped forward, not toward me, toward her. Vivian, he said, and his voice changed, softer, warmer, the voice of someone greeting an old friend, or an old lover. In that moment, I saw everything clearly. I'd spent 15 years trying to be enough for a man who'd never wanted enough. I'd spent 15 years shrinking myself to fit the space he was willing to give me. I'd made excuses for his distance. Rationalized his dismissiveness, explained away every sign that I was occupying a placeholder position in his life. And now I was supposed to move into a storage room while the placeholder role was filled by the person he'd actually wanted all along. I watched Daniel step toward Vivian. I watched him reach for her suitcase. I watched him turn his back on me without a second thought. Then I did something that surprised both of them. I picked up my phone and made a call. Hi, I said. It's Mara. I need to confirm that tomorrow morning is still good for the move. Daniel turned back. His face had the expression of someone who didn't understand what he was hearing. The movers are coming at 9, I continued. All my things from the house. I'll be at the new address by the end of the day. Mara. Daniel's voice was sharp. What are you doing? I met his eyes. Exactly what you asked me to do, I said. I'm moving out of your bedroom. I'm just moving a little farther away than you expected. I smiled at Vivian. The guest room is nice, I told her. Daniel had it renovated last year. Very thoughtful of him. She didn't know what to say. Neither did he. I walked past them both, into the kitchen where I started making tea, as if this were any ordinary evening, as if my entire life weren't about to change. But I'd been preparing for this evening for 3 months. 3 months of quietly gathering documents. 3 months of untangling my name from joint accounts. 3 months of contacting lawyers and accountants and people Daniel had never heard of. They still didn't know what I had planned. They still didn't know what I knew. But they were about to find out. I looked toward the front door, where Daniel was still standing with his hand on Vivian's luggage. Daniel and Vivian thought they knew how this night would end. I already knew differently. I'd known for months. Tonight was just the beginning. And the real surprise hadn't arrived yet. I moved into my grandmother's building on a Wednesday morning. The movers arrived at 9, just as I'd arranged. They carried out boxes I'd packed myself. Clothes, books, the embroidery supplies Daniel had always called clutter. He stood in the hallway watching them work while Vivian made coffee in my kitchen. She was already treating the place like her own. I watched her from the front door. She opened cabinet after cabinet, frowning at the arrangement. She pulled out mugs I'd collected over years of travel and set them aside. She opened the pantry and made a face at the organization. This is going to take some work, she said to Daniel. He didn't answer. He was still watching me. Are you sure about this? He asked. His voice had that edge it got when he realized he might have miscalculated. The building you're moving to hasn't been maintained in years. I checked. Of course he checked. Daniel checked everything. He'd probably already called the property records office, trying to figure out how much the place was worth. He'd probably already talked to his lawyer. I didn't tell him what I knew. I just smiled. The building is fine, I said. I know exactly what condition it's in. His eyes narrowed. He didn't like it when I was calm. He'd built 15 years of marriage on the assumption that I would eventually break down and do what he wanted. Calmness meant I wasn't playing the game his way. Mara. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so Vivian couldn't hear. This is ridiculous. You're a married woman. You can't just move out in the middle of the day like some kind of teenager. Watch me. I'm serious. You don't have to do this. We can talk about this. We can figure something out. I looked at him. I looked at the man I'd spent 15 years with, the man who'd held my hand during my mother's funeral, the man who'd promised to love me in sickness and in health. The man who'd spent the last decade making me feel like I was a burden he'd kindly decided to tolerate. Why now? I asked. Why not last year, when I asked you to come to my grandmother's memorial service? You said you had a meeting. You sent flowers instead. He flinched. That was... Or 3 years ago, when I had that health scare, and you told me to take a cab to the hospital because Vivian needed help moving apartments. I explained that to you. She had no one else. And I had you. At least I was supposed to. The words hung in the air between us. Daniel's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Something that might have been guilt, or might have been annoyance that I'd brought it up. It's different when it's Vivian, he said. You know that. She's been through so much. She's alone in the world. I almost laughed. She'd never been alone. She'd always had Daniel. I'd been the one who was alone. I turned to leave. Mara. His voice cracked. I almost believed he might actually want me to stay. Then I saw Vivian appear in the kitchen doorway. She was holding my favorite mug, the one I bought on my honeymoon in Italy, the one Daniel had given me as a wedding gift. "This is lovely," she said, studying the ceramic. "Daniel, did you pick this out?" He didn't answer. He was watching me watch her. She caught my gaze and smiled. That practice smile. The one that said she wasn't doing anything wrong. The one that said I was the one causing problems. I made a decision. "The mug is yours," I said. "Keep it." Her smile flickered. "Everything in that kitchen, you should keep it. All of it. I don't need it where I'm going." The movers were done. They'd loaded the last of my boxes into the truck. I walked past Daniel and Vivian and out the door without looking back. I didn't want to see their faces. I wanted to remember what it felt like to walk away. The building wasn't abandoned. That was the first thing Daniel would discover when he finally sent someone to check. My grandmother's shop had been operating for decades, not at full capacity, not with a public storefront, but with contracts and clients and people who'd been coming to her for years. I'd taken over those contracts quietly, slowly, one call at a time. My first customer was a man named Leonard. He'd been my grandmother's client since before I was born. He owned a small boutique downtown, the kind of place that catered to people who didn't need to ask the price of things. "Mara," he said when I walked into his store that afternoon, "your grandmother talked about you all the time, said you had her hands, her eye." I smiled. She said I had her stubbornness too. She said that too. He pulled out a piece of fabric, ivory silk, beautifully woven. "This is for a wedding dress," he said. "The bride wants her grandmother's pattern reproduced. You can do it." I touched the fabric. I knew the pattern. I'd studied it for months before my grandmother died, memorizing every stitch. "I'll start tonight," I said. He nodded, then he pulled out a checkbook. "Your grandmother always charged $6,000 for this kind of work, but she'd been charging that price for 30 years. The market's changed. I don't think you should charge the same thing. How much would you suggest?" "The same work from a European house would cost $20,000, minimum, and those houses don't have half the skill. Your grandmother was an artist. You're carrying her legacy." I took the check he wrote. $22,000 for one piece of work. Work I could do in 3 weeks, working quietly in the upstairs room of my grandmother's building. This was how it would start, one contract at a time, one reputation slowly rebuilt. But there was something else I'd been building. Something I hadn't told Daniel about. The building he thought was abandoned wasn't just a textile shop. IT was the home of a business that had been quietly accumulating wealth for 40 years, and my grandmother had been careful. She'd reinvested. She bought property. She'd built a portfolio that Daniel's family had never thought to look at because they'd been too busy dismissing her as a hobbyist. I'd been the executor of her estate for 3 years. I'd known exactly how much it was worth. But I'd never told Daniel. I'd never told anyone. Because somewhere along the way, I'd learned that the smartest move was keeping my cards close. The smartest move was letting people think I had nothing so they'd never think to take it. I spent that first night in the building alone. The upstairs room had been prepared. I paid cleaners months ago. I'd had the roof repaired and the plumbing updated. I'd quietly made it a home while Daniel thought I was at the grocery store or the gym or anywhere else I told him I was going. He never checked. He never asked. He barely noticed I was gone. I sat in my grandmother's chair that night and started the wedding pattern. The ivory silk glowed in the lamplight. The needle moved through the fabric like it had been waiting for me all these years. My phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Daniel. I let it ring. It rang again, and again. Then a message came through. "Where are you? Your lawyer called. I'm not signing anything until we talk." I set the phone down. I knew what my lawyer had called about. The property disclosure. The document I'd filed that morning revealing the full extent of my grandmother's estate. Daniel had thought he was married to a woman with nothing. He was about to discover how wrong he was. But I wasn't going to tell him over the phone. I wasn't going to give him time to prepare. I was going to let him wait, let him worry, let him wonder what else he'd missed. The same way he'd made me wait for 15 years. The same way he'd made me wonder. He'd learn, eventually. He'd learn exactly what he'd thrown away. But he would learn it on my timeline. Not his. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a different number. One I'd saved under a name Daniel wouldn't recognize. "Everything is ready for tomorrow," the message said. "The building inspection is confirmed. The architect is waiting for your approval. The contractors are standing by." I smiled in the dark. Tomorrow, I'd start the renovations. The day after that, I'd file the paperwork to open the storefront. Within a month, my grandmother's building would be transformed into something Daniel's family would never be able to ignore. But more than that, I'd transformed myself. I was no longer the woman who'd waited 15 years for Daniel to love her. I was the woman who'd made sure she could walk away. The woman with plans and assets and a network of clients who'd respected my grandmother and now respected me. The woman who'd known for months exactly what was coming. I pulled out my phone and typed one last message. "Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow." Then I turned back to the ivory silk. The pattern was complicated. I had 3 weeks to finish it. But I'd never been afraid of complicated work. I'd spent 15 years living in Daniel's house, disappearing into the background, making myself small and quiet and easy to ignore. That had been the hardest work of my life. This, the embroidery, the business, the planning, this was easy. Because this was what I'd been born to do. And Daniel had never bothered to find out. He'd never asked. He'd never looked. He'd never noticed. But he was going to notice now. He was going to notice everything. And by the time he did, it would be too late. I smiled and picked up my needle. They didn't know what I already knew. I'd already won. I'd just been waiting for the right moment to collect. Daniel showed up at my grandmother's building 3 days after I moved out. I wasn't surprised. I'd been expecting him. What surprised me was who he brought with him. Vivian stood at his side wearing a cream-colored coat and that expression she'd perfected, the one that suggested she was only here because she'd been dragged along. Her hand rested on Daniel's arm like she was studying him, like he was the one who needed support. I was standing in what would become the main showroom. The contractors had finished the demolition that morning. Dust covered everything. The air smelled like drywall and fresh paint. I was wearing work clothes and a dust mask, and I looked exactly like someone who'd been doing physical labor for 6 hours. Mara. Daniel's voice echoed in the empty room. We need to talk. About what? About this. He gestured at the space around him. About what you're doing. About, he stopped. Looked at the workers behind me. Can we talk in private? I pulled off my dust mask. Everything here is private. These people don't care about your drama. Vivian's mouth tightened. I almost missed it. Almost. Daniel's been so worried about you, she said. He hasn't slept in days. I told him you'd be fine, but he couldn't stop thinking about you being here alone. I looked at her. You told him I'd be fine? She nodded. All sincerity. I know how strong you are, Mara. I've seen how you handle things. You've never seen me handle anything. Her smile flickered. Well, I meant, I've heard Daniel talk about you so much. Another lie. Daniel had barely mentioned me in 15 years. I knew because I'd listened to his phone calls. I'd heard the way he described his life to other people. The way he talked about me as if I were a piece of his house. Present, necessary, but never worth discussing. I turned to Daniel. What do you want? He stepped closer. Vivian stayed where she was, watching. I want you to come home, he said. I laughed. It wasn't a pretty laugh. It was the kind of laugh that came from somewhere deep in my chest, somewhere I'd been keeping bottled up for years. Come home, I repeated. To what, exactly? To the storage room? To the house you've already started redecorating? To the kitchen where Vivian's already replaced my mugs? Daniel's face reddened. That's not. I saw the photos, Daniel. I have people who tell me things. I know she's already changed the curtains and rearranged the furniture. I know she's sleeping in my bed. Mara. Your bed. I corrected myself. It was never really mine, was it? I was just borrowing it. Vivian stepped forward. Mara, please don't blame Daniel for this. This is all my fault. I should never have come back. I didn't realize. She stopped. A tear slid down her cheek. A single, perfect tear. I'd seen that tear before. I'd seen it in my own house, the day she'd first arrived. I'd seen it every time Daniel was about to make a decision that favored her over me. What I'd never seen was Vivian crying when she thought no one was watching. I knew because I'd set up a camera in Daniel's study before I left. I'd wanted to see what happened when I wasn't there. What I'd seen was Vivian making phone calls. Lots of them. To banks. To lawyers. To a man whose name I didn't recognize. Each conversation was careful, measured, and absolutely cold. She wasn't crying when she thought no one was looking. She was scheming. Vivian, I said calmly. The camera in Daniel's study caught everything. She froze. Daniel looked between us. What camera? Your wife installed a camera in your study. Vivian's voice was sharp. She spied on us. I shrugged. I spied on you. I wanted to see who was really moving into my house. And what I found was interesting. Vivian's face had gone pale. Daniel, I didn't know about any camera. I didn't. I'm not talking about the sex. I said. Daniel's face went red. I already knew about that and I suspected it for years. What I didn't know was we were calling the men in suits, the lawyers, the bank accounts. Daniel stared at me. What are you talking about? I looked at Vivian. She didn't look scared. She looked calculated. The tears were gone. The mask had dropped, and underneath it was something I recognized. A woman who'd been playing a long game. You're not here because you love him, I said. You're here because he's the asset. The money. The security. Mara, that's insane. Daniel stepped in front of Vivian, blocking me from her. You don't know what you're talking about. No. I pulled out my phone, opened a folder. This is your bank history for the last 6 months. The transfers to a trust Vivian controls, the loans you took out against the house. The assets you liquidated without telling me. Daniel's face went white. I kept going. And this. I pulled up another document. This is Vivian's financial history. Her divorce settlement wasn't as generous as she told you. She's been in debt for years. She had a gambling problem in Europe. She lost most of her money, and now she's back, looking for the one person she knew would take care of her. Mara, stop. Daniel's voice cracked. You don't have proof of any of this. I have everything. I've been collecting it for months, since before she even booked her flight. Actually, Dio, you want to know how? The wedding invitation she sent to one of your business partners. The email she sent to your mother. The text she sent to your lawyer. She's been working this for a long time. Vivian finally spoke. You're insane. You've lost your mind. Have I? I looked at her. Then, why did you withdraw $50,000 from Daniel's account 3 days before I left? Why did you transfer it to a private account under your maiden name? Why were you planning to run? Daniel went very still. Daniel, Vivian said quickly. She's making this up. She's bitter. She's trying to turn you against me. I pulled up the final document. The bank transfer receipt. The one Vivian thought she deleted. Daniel took the phone from my hands. He scrolled. I watched his face change. Color draining. Eyes widening. The slow realization that the woman he'd chosen over me had been manipulating him for months. Vivian. His voice was flat. What is this? It's not what it looks like. Then explain it. She opened her mouth. Closed it. For the first time, she looked genuinely lost. I stepped back. Let Daniel work through it on his own. He was smart. He'd figured out. He'd figure out that the woman he'd been willing to make me a stranger for had never loved him at all. She loved his money. And I'd just shown him the proof. But there was one more thing, one document I'd been saving. Mara, Daniel started. I'm not done, I said. There's one more thing. I pulled out my grandmother's will. The building you're standing in, I said. This isn't just a textile shop. It's the headquarters of a company that owns 3 properties downtown. It holds the trademarks for designs that are in 2 major museums. IT has a pension fund for employees who worked here for 40 years. So what? Daniel said. You own an old building. I own a mansion. You own a mansion with a mortgage, I said. My grandmother's company is debt-free. IT has been for 30 years. The building alone is worth 4 times your house. The trademarks are worth 10 times that, and I've been the majority shareholder since I was 30 years old. Wait, Daniel's voice rose. You own all of this? You've always owned this. Since my grandmother died and I told you about her memorial service, you didn't come, you sent flowers and went to a business lunch. I sat in that memorial service with my lawyer and signed the paperwork that made me worth $30 million, and then I went home to you, and you told me I was a burden. His face was white, completely white. You never told me, he whispered. You never asked. The words hung between us. He didn't have anything to say. He'd spent 15 years making me feel small. 15 years treating me like I was lucky to have him. 15 years believing I was nothing without him. All while I'd been holding the deed to a fortune. All while I'd been waiting for the moment I'd need to walk away. And now I had. Now he was standing in my building, with my proof, surrounded by the wreckage of his decisions. I would have taken care of you, he finally said. If I'd known, I would have been different. You would have been the same, I said. You would have been the same, and I still would have left. The money isn't what broke us, Daniel. The money was never the point. He stared at me. I looked past him at Vivian. She was already backing toward the door. I could see her calculating. Her plan had fallen apart. She thought I was nothing. She thought I was someone she could steamroll. She hadn't expected a fight. Vivian, I called. You can go. There's nothing for you here. Daniel doesn't have the money you thought he had. His family's business is in trouble. He hid that from everyone. He's been using what was left to make you think he was richer than he is. Daniel's face went white again. How do you know that? Because I see everything, Daniel. I saw Vivian's expression change. The mask of the sweet, helpless woman dissolving into something colder, angrier. She looked at Daniel with naked contempt. You lied to me, she said. You lied to me, Daniel shouted. You've been using me. Using you for what? She laughed bitterly. You're a bankrupt man pretending to be a prince. I wasted months on you. I could have done better. She turned and walked out the door. Daniel stared at the space where she'd been standing. He looked like someone who'd just discovered gravity had reversed. She was using me, he said. The whole time. You were right. I'm always right, Daniel. You just never listened. He looked at me. All the anger had drained out of him. All the confidence. He looked like a man who just realized he'd lost everything. Can we try again? He asked. I know I made mistakes. I know I should have treated you better. But we've been married for 15 years. That means something. I love you. I looked at him. I'd waited 15 years to hear those words. I'd waited for him to say them first. To say them like he meant them. He'd never said them before. Not once. In 15 years, he'd said, I care about you, and I appreciate you, and I'm glad we're married. But never, I love you. Now you tell me, I said. After everything. After I caught her. After you lost her. Now you tell me. Daniel reached for my hand. I mean it, Mara. I love you. I always have. I pulled my hand back. Too late, I said. I've loved you for 15 years. I've loved you when you ignored me. When you pushed me away. When you chose her over and over again. I loved you until you put me in a storage room. That was the day I stopped. That was the day I realized you didn't love me. You never did. You loved what I gave you. And I gave you everything. He didn't have an answer. He didn't have anything at all. I turned away from him. I had work to do. Goodbye, Daniel. I walked toward the door of my grandmother's building. Behind me, I heard his footsteps retreat. Slow at first. Then faster. Then the slam of his car door. The engine starting. He left. And I was finally alone. I should have felt sad. I felt free. Free of him. Free of Vivian. Free of the ghost I'd been in his house. Free of the years I'd spent making myself small. I looked at the building around me. At the contractors waiting for instructions. At the dust and the promise of what it would become. It was mine. All of it. And I'd built it myself. Well, my grandmother had built it, but I'd kept it standing. I'd protected it. I'd made it grow. And now I'd do more. I'd make it flourish. Because the only person I'd ever really needed to impress was myself. And I'd finally done that. I reached for my phone. There was a message from the lawyer. Everything is ready, it said. The hearing is tomorrow morning. Daniel's mother has been served. She'll be there. I smiled. It wasn't done yet. The hardest part was still coming. But I was ready. I'd been ready for months. And I already knew how this story would end. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. I'd seen enough television to imagine something grander. High ceilings, polished wood, the kind of room where life-changing decisions got made with dramatic gravity. This was just a room. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, a judge who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. But it was the room where I'd finally end this. Daniel sat across the aisle. His mother, Patricia, sat beside him. She was wearing a navy suit and the kind of expression that suggested she'd just smelled something unpleasant. Patricia had never liked me. She'd made that clear from the first time we met, 15 years ago, when she'd looked at my hands and asked if I'd ever done anything besides needlework. She'd been asking that question for 15 years. She was about to get her answer. My client requests a full division of assets, my lawyer began. Mrs. Thompson has been the primary contributor to several investment accounts that were established during the marriage. Patricia scoffed loud enough for the judge to hear. Mr. Thompson's lawyer will have his turn, the judge said flatly. I kept my face neutral. I'd learned to keep my face neutral through 15 years of Patricia's dinner parties and Patricia's comments and Patricia's insistence that I wasn't good enough for her son. I'd taken every piece of it and stored it away. And now I was going to use it. Daniel's lawyer stood. He was a thin man with expensive glasses and the kind of confidence that came from billing by the hour. Mr. Thompson asserts that his wife had no separate property of significant value entering the marriage. Any assets she claims are marital property and should be divided accordingly. I saw Daniel shift in his seat. He knew what was coming. He'd seen the documents. He just didn't want his mother to see them. But I'd made sure Patricia would see everything. My client's grandmother established a trust, my lawyer said, 45 years ago. Mrs. Thompson became the sole beneficiary at age 30. The trust's holdings include commercial real estate, intellectual property, and a business that has generated consistent revenue for 45 years. All of this predates the marriage by several years. The judge looked at the documents. Patricia's face went through several phases. Confusion, then calculation, then the kind of anger that comes from realizing you've made a very expensive mistake. These assets were never disclosed, Daniel's lawyer said. If Mrs. Thompson hid them, she didn't hide them, I said. She simply didn't discuss them. There's a difference. The judge looked at me. Mrs. Thompson, you're not to speak unless addressed. Sorry, Your Honor. I wasn't sorry. I'd waited 15 years to speak. Patricia leaned toward her son. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could read her face. She was asking him why he had known. She was asking him how he'd married someone who turned out to be this valuable. She was asking him where he'd gone wrong. He didn't have an answer. None of them had answers. My client also requests that the court acknowledge the prenuptial agreement Mrs. Thompson's family required before the wedding, my lawyer continued. The agreement specifically states that any property acquired through Mrs. Thompson's grandmother's estate remains separate. Daniel's lawyer straightened. My client disputes the validity of that agreement. Why? Because it was signed under duress. His mother will testify. Your Honor, I interrupted, my attorney has documents for Mr. Thompson's personal emails indicating that he was fully aware of the agreement's terms and attempted to nullify them by hiding the original copy from his wife. The room went very still. I watched Patricia's face turn the color of a fresh bruise. Daniel looked at me with something that might have been fear. Your Honor, I said, my husband removed a signed, notarized agreement from our marital home and destroyed it. He thought I wouldn't have copies. I did not, Daniel started. Mr. Thompson, you will wait until you are addressed, the judge said. I didn't need to see the rest. I'd already won. But I wasn't done yet. I pulled out the folder of Vivian's financial transactions, the transfers, the loans, the attempt to drain Daniel's accounts while he was distracted. I didn't include it in the formal filings. I didn't need to be done. I just needed Patricia to see it. I slid the folder across the table toward her. She looked at me, then at the folder. Then she opened it. Her face went through a transformation I'd never seen before. Shock, then rage, then a kind of cold, quiet calculation that almost made me feel sorry for Daniel. He didn't know what was in that folder. But his mother did. And she was going to destroy him for it. We'll need a short recess, Daniel's lawyer said abruptly. Granted, 20 minutes. The minute the judge left the room, Patricia stood up. She grabbed Daniel's arm with a grip that made him wince. We need to talk, she said. Mom. Outside. Now. He followed her. I watched them go. I waited. 20 minutes passed, then 30. When they came back, Daniel looked pale. Patricia looked absolutely livid. She also looked determined. Mrs. Thompson, the judge said, have we reached an agreement? Patricia stood. We have, Your Honor. My son will sign the dissolution documents as requested. He will not contest the division of assets. He will, however, request that his mother's involvement in the business be. Patricia. Daniel's voice was sharp. Stop. His mother looked at him with pure venom. Stop. You ruined us. You lost the house. You lost the accounts. You let that woman. Enough. The judge's voice cut through. If there's conflict between the parties, I can order separate legal counsel for each. Patricia sat down. My lawyer looked at me. I nodded. We'd known this would happen. I'd known Patricia would turn on her son the second she realized he'd been hiding things from her. I'd known she'd make the divorce easy just to salvage what she could. I'd known everything. I'd planned everything. Mrs. Thompson, the judge said, you'll be awarded your separate property plus $2 million in settlement from the joint marital assets. Is that acceptable? $2 million. A fraction of what I was worth. A fraction of what Daniel had spent on Vivian. But it wasn't about the money. It was about the fact that I'd walked into this courtroom with nothing and walked out with everything. Daniel signed the papers. I watched his hand shake. Mr. Thompson, the judge said, you've made your position clear. Final decree will be entered in 5 business days. Congratulations. No one in the room thought that was funny. Daniel didn't even look at me. Patricia did. Her face had settled into something old and cold and absolutely pure. You won, she said. I hope you're happy. Happy. I looked at her. I'm free. That's better than happy. Daniel stood. He was still pale. He looked like someone who'd been in an accident and hadn't yet realized his body was broken. Mara, he said, can we? No. I walked out of the courtroom. My lawyer followed me. But I wasn't done. I had one more piece of evidence. One more document I'd been saving for the perfect moment. I'd found it in Patricia's safe. The safe she thought no one knew about. The safe with a combination she'd never changed, the same one she'd used since Daniel was a child. Inside was a copy of the will she'd made her husband sign before he died, the will that left everything to her, the will that disinherited Daniel's brothers and sisters, the will that had been written 3 weeks before Daniel's father died. I'd found the original will, too, the one that left everything equally to all 5 children. Patricia had destroyed it. She'd replaced it with a forgery. I'd had the forgery analyzed by a forensic document examiner. The report was damning. The ink, the signature, the notary stamp, everything pointed to fraud. But I hadn't used it. Not yet. I was saving it for something. And now I'd found the perfect use. My lawyer met me in the hallway. "You have what you need." I nodded. "I'll send the documents tonight." "To whom?" "To the 4 siblings Patricia disinherited. Each one will get a copy. By tomorrow morning. They'll all know. By the end of the week, Patricia will be fighting her own children for control of her own estate." My lawyer smiled. "Where did you learn to play chess like this?" I smiled back. 15 years of being invisible, I said. "You see a lot of things when people think you're not watching." I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, the warmth on my face, the street noise filtering in through the windows, the weight of all that's happened settling somewhere in my chest. I was divorced. I was free. I was worth more than Daniel's family had ever dreamed. And I hadn't even told them about the rest. The contracts I'd signed in the last 6 months, the partners I'd found, the new business I was building. They thought they knew what I had. They had no idea. My phone buzzed, a message from an unfamiliar number. "I heard about the hearing," it said. "Congratulations. I'd like to meet you. I have information you might find useful. Information about Vivian, about her past, about what she's really been doing." I stared at the message. Who was this? Someone from Daniel's world? Someone from Vivian's past? I typed back. "Who is this?" The response came quickly. "Someone who's been watching. Someone who knows you've only scratched the surface. Meet me tonight if you're brave enough." I looked at the message for a long moment. I thought about walking away. I thought about being done. But I wasn't done. Not yet. There was more to this story. Vivian's past. Her real past. The thing she'd been hiding from everyone. The thing that made her so desperate to get to Daniel. I typed. Where and when. The address came through immediately. A small cafe downtown. Neutral ground. Public. I smiled. Maybe Vivian wasn't the only one with secrets. Maybe the next chapter was about to begin. I still had more to discover. And for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't afraid to look. The cafe was empty when I arrived. That should have been my first warning. Downtown at 8 o'clock on a Thursday, every place should have been crowded. But this one had a closed sign hanging in the window, flipped to open just long enough for me to walk through the door. The man sitting at the back table was older than I expected. Maybe 60, silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of face that had seen things and learned to keep them to himself. He was drinking something dark and waiting like he had all the time in the world. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "thank you for coming." "It's Miss Shaw now." I took my grandmother's name back. He nodded as if this was exactly what he'd expected. Smart. Distance yourself from that family completely. You already know they're rotten at the core. I know Daniel's mother is a forger. I know his ex-girlfriend was draining his accounts. What else is there? He smiled. "You've seen the surface. You haven't seen the foundation." I sat down across from him. "Then show me." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin file. Not a folder. Something older. Something that had been kept in a safe for a long time. "Vivian Hart," he said. "That's not her real name." I waited. Her real name is Vivian Kowalski. She changed it 20 years ago when she left the country. She had good reason to leave. She was under investigation for fraud in 3 states. Fraud. Identity theft. Credit card schemes. She was very good at it. She found wealthy men, got close to them, drained their accounts, and disappeared before anyone could stop her. I opened the file, pages of police reports, court documents. Photographs of a younger Vivian looking exactly the same as she did now. Innocent, trusting, like she couldn't possibly have done anything wrong. "She's been doing this for decades," I said. "Decades. Her specialty is married men. She finds the ones who are already looking for an excuse to leave their wives. She gives them that excuse. She makes them feel like they're the ones making the choice, and while they're distracted, she takes everything she can." I kept reading. There was more. A lot more. "She was investigated in Europe too," I said. "Italy. France. She left both countries before charges could be filed. The gambling debts caught up with her in Spain. That's why she came back to America. She needed money quickly, and she knew exactly where to find it. Daniel. Daniel's family has been circling the drain for years. The business is failing. His mother's been borrowing against assets that don't exist. But Daniel doesn't know that. His mother has been keeping it from him. She's been making him think they're still wealthy, so he'd keep working for free." I looked up. Wait, Patricia told me they had a trust fund. She always said Daniel's inheritance was coming. That's why he never worried about money. His inheritance is gone. Patricia spent it. She gambled it away in the same casinos Vivian was using. The pieces clicked together. Patricia and Vivian had known each other. They'd been part of the same circles. Maybe even the same schemes. "Vivian knows about the money," I said slowly. "She knows it's gone. But she went after Daniel anyway. Because Daniel is the only remaining asset," the man said. "The name still has value. The family still has connections. Vivian doesn't want his money. She wants his name. She wants to become Vivian Thompson. With that name, she can access circles she could never reach on her own." I closed the file. So, she was never planning to stay with him. She was going to take the name and leave. Exactly. The money she was draining was just a bonus. The real prize was the name. And Patricia knew about it. She helped Vivian get close to Daniel. She encouraged the affair. Encouraged is a gentle word. She orchestrated it. She wanted you gone, and Vivian was the perfect weapon. Patricia just didn't realize Vivian had her own agenda. I sat back in my chair. The cafe was quiet. Too quiet. I realized now that the man had probably paid the owner to close early. He didn't want anyone overhearing this. "Who are you?" I asked. "Why do you have this file?" He looked at me for a long moment. "My name is Edward. I was your grandmother's lawyer for 30 years. I stared at him. "Your grandmother kept files on everyone," he continued. "She knew about Patricia's schemes. She knew about Vivian. She knew about the gambling. She knew about everything. She didn't tell you because she wanted you to find out on your own. She said you'd need to see it for yourself before you'd believe it. She said that. She said you were smart, strong, but you gave people too much credit. She said you'd need to be hurt before you'd stop trusting people who didn't deserve it." I felt something twist in my chest. My grandmother had known. She'd known I was walking into a trap, and she let me walk anyway. "She was right," I said. "She usually was." Edward pushed another file across the table. This one was thicker. "Patricia's been hiding assets from her own children. The will she forged is only the beginning. She also liquidated trusts that were meant for Daniel's siblings. She's been stealing from them for years. When they find out, they'll come after her. They'll tear her apart in court, and they'll take everything she's got, including the house." I thought about Patricia's face in the courtroom. That cold, calculating expression. She'd thought she was winning. She thought I was just a nuisance she could dismiss. She had no idea what was coming. "Your grandmother had one more request," Edward said. "Before she died, she asked me to give you something. She said you'd know when the right time came." He pulled out a small velvet box. I opened it. Inside was a silver pin, a delicate embroidery needle, fashioned into a brooch. The needle was pointing upward, toward a tiny sun. "She said you'd know what it meant." I did. When I was a child, my grandmother taught me to embroider. She said the needle was the most powerful tool a woman could own, not because of what it could make, but because of what it could repair. "This needle," she'd said, "can mend anything. Fabric, relationships, lives, if you know how to use it." I'd never known what she meant until now. I was going to mend my life. And I was going to use the same tools Patricia and Vivian had used against me. I put the pin on my jacket. "Thank you," I said to Edward. "I'll take it from here." He nodded. "One more thing. Vivian is still in the city. She moved into an apartment 2 blocks from Daniel's office. She's not done with him. She'll try to come back." "Let her," I said. "I've been waiting for her to make another move." "What will you do?" I smiled. "The same thing Vivian does. Watch. Wait. Collect information. Let people destroy themselves." Edward stood. "You are your grandmother's granddaughter." He left. I stayed in the empty cafe for a long time, thinking. I thought about Vivian, the professional scammer who targeted married men for decades. She'd been doing this longer than I'd been married. She had more experience than Patricia. She'd fooled people for so long she'd probably started to believe her own lies. But Vivian had made one mistake. She'd assumed I was ordinary. She'd assumed I was the kind of woman who'd fall apart when her husband left her. The kind of woman who'd fight and cry and make a scene. She hadn't counted on someone who'd been planning for months. I pulled out my phone. I had contacts now. People who owed me favors. People who were willing to help me burn Daniel's family to the ground. I typed a message to my lawyer. "I need a private investigator. Someone who specializes in financial fraud. Someone who can find everything Vivian has done in the last 20 years. The response came immediately. "I know exactly who to call." I typed back. "Good. Tell him to start with her Spanish accounts. And tell him to look for Patricia's name in those accounts too. I want to know if they've been working together. If Vivian and Patricia had been collaborating, if they'd been planning this as a team, I needed proof that I needed to show Daniel exactly how deep the betrayal went. I needed to make sure he understood that the woman he'd chosen was never just an old flame. She was a con artist. And his mother had handed her the keys. I left the cafe and walked to my car. The night air was cold, clean. I'd been breathing toxic air for 15 years and hadn't even noticed. Now I noticed everything. I got in the car and sat for a moment, thinking about the next move. Vivian was still in the city. That meant she was still planning something. She'd invested months in Daniel. She wouldn't give up that easily, especially now that she knew I was leaving. She'd try to come between us one last time. She'd try to convince Daniel that I was the villain. She'd try to get him to turn against me completely, so she could have full access to whatever was left of his fortune. She didn't know there was nothing left. She didn't know Patricia had already taken it all. I smiled in the dark. This was going to be beautiful. I started the car. I had meetings tomorrow, contracts to sign, a business to build. I'd spent 15 years living in Daniel's shadow. Now I was going to build something so bright it would blind all of them. But first, I needed to tie up one loose end. I needed to make sure Vivian never came back to me again. And I knew exactly how to do it. I pulled out my phone and sent one more message. To the investigator, to the lawyer, to everyone who was waiting for my next move. Bring me everything. I want her history. I want her mistakes. I want a list of every person she ever hurt. I want the full story. The response came back. You'll have it by tomorrow morning. I drove home to my grandmother's building. The lights were on in the embroidery room. The contractors had left hours ago. The building was quiet, but it felt like mine. For the first time in 15 years, everything felt like mine. I sat down at my grandmother's table and opened the file Edward had given me. There was more inside, more than he'd told me, more than I'd expected. A letter. in my grandmother's handwriting. My dearest Mara, it began. If you're reading this, you finally found your way back to yourself. I'm sorry it took so long, but I knew you'd get here eventually. I read the letter 3 times. My grandmother had known. She'd known everything. She'd known about Patricia, about Vivian, about the lies and the schemes and the slow erosion of my marriage. And she trusted me to figure it out on my own. She trusted me to save myself. I put the letter down and picked my needle. There was work to do, a wedding dress to finish, a business to build, a life to live. But for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I felt like I was home. And I already knew what was coming next. Vivian was going to make another move. Patricia was going to try to stop me. Daniel was going to regret everything he'd ever done. But I was ready. I'd been ready for months. And the real surprise hadn't arrived yet.